It all started when I decided my driveway was too boring, just a plain slab of concrete that served no purpose except collecting leaves and reminding me to take out the trash, so I thought it would be fun to paint a giant chessboard across the whole thing, complete with bold black and white squares big enough to stand on. Less than an hour after I painted the final square, before the paint had even fully dried, Carol, our infamous HOA president and full-time neighborhood tyrant, marched up to my front door holding a clipboard, a camera, and a printed copy of the bylaws that she had highlighted and tabbed like it was her doctoral thesis. She informed me in her most dramatic tone that my driveway chessboard violated at least 7 different rules, including unauthorized alteration of driveway surfaces, installation of non-standard decorative elements, unapproved outdoor recreation structures, and a baffling citation for visual disruption of community aesthetics. I tried to explain that it was just paint, temporary and harmless, but Carol's eyes narrowed like I had proposed turning my house into a medieval castle, and she warned me that if the chessboard was not removed within 72 hours, I would face escalating daily fines, followed by an official HOA disciplinary hearing. I will admit, for about 10 minutes I considered just power washing the board away and avoiding the fight altogether, but the sheer absurdity of Carol's overreaction made something inside me snap, like a pawn realizing it could become a queen if it just marched a little farther. Instead of removing the chessboard, I upgraded it, buying a full set of oversized chess pieces, each nearly 3 feet tall, and placed them carefully across the board so anyone walking by could see an active game in progress. Within hours, neighbors started stopping by to admire it, kids ran up to move the giant pieces around, and soon enough, my boring driveway had turned into the most popular front yard attraction in the neighborhood. Carol, of course, returned almost immediately, snapping photos like she was documenting a crime scene, and screaming at me about property values, safety hazards, and something about how I was encouraging loitering, which, as far as I could tell, was just her way of describing people having fun. When she saw my neighbor's teenage son playing chess with his grandfather right there on the driveway, she practically short-circuited, demanding to know if I had applied for a permit to operate an outdoor recreation facility, as though my driveway was suddenly a theme park. I told her it was just a friendly game between neighbors, but Carol was already writing me up for unauthorized event hosting, a brand new violation she seemed to invent on the spot. By the end of the week, the chessboard had turned into a full-blown neighborhood obsession, with people driving by just to see who was playing and leaving post-it notes on my mailbox with suggested opening moves and strategy tips. I leaned into it completely, setting up a chalkboard next to the driveway so everyone could vote on the next move like a giant community chess match, and before long my little project had become a living game played by the entire street. Carol, now seething with fury, sent me formal notices accusing me of turning my driveway into an unauthorized community center, claiming I had illegally modified common property even though the driveway was legally part of my lot. I responded by painting a second, smaller chessboard on the sidewalk in front of my house, calling it the neighborhood speed chess court, which triggered another wave of violation letters so aggressive they were practically vibrating when I opened the envelope. Carol demanded an emergency HOA meeting to address what she called driveway anarchy, but the moment the meeting started, several neighbors stood up to defend the chessboard, calling it the best thing to ever happen on our boring street. One elderly neighbor, who had barely spoken at any previous meeting, told everyone the chessboard had rekindled his love for the game and given him a reason to go outside every day, which earned a standing ovation from half the room. Carol's face looked like she had swallowed a hornet, but her frustration only fueled my creativity, and I spent the next week adding decorative borders around the chessboard, complete with quotes about strategy, checkmate, and community, turning my driveway into both a game board and a public art installation. Carol countered by citing me for unauthorized signage, improper driveway ornamentation, and inappropriate use of educational materials in a residential setting, a violation so ridiculous that my lawyer actually framed it in his office. The more she fought the chessboard, the more popular it became, with local kids forming chess teams, neighbors hosting casual tournaments, and even the local paper running a story about the driveway chess craze transforming Maplewood into the most unexpectedly intellectual neighborhood in town. Carol tried everything. Noise complaints when people laughed too loudly, safety complaints claiming the chess pieces could become projectiles in high wind, even an environmental complaint about paint runoff, despite the fact I had used eco-friendly driveway paint. But every complaint only added fuel to the fire, and by the time my driveway hosted its first official Maplewood Chess Invitational, complete with a folding table for snacks and a homemade trophy for the winner, it was clear to everyone but Carol that the chessboard was here to stay. As I stood on my porch watching 2 kids play a tense endgame while their parents cheered from lawn chairs, I realized this was no longer just about chess. It was about proving that a neighborhood belonged to its people, not its bylaws. Carol could fine me, threaten me, and bury me in laminated rules, but she could not erase the joy on my neighbors' faces as they gathered around that board, playing, laughing, and remembering that life was supposed to be fun. The chessboard was no longer just a game, it was a declaration that creativity had a place here, and that no clipboard-wielding tyrant could ever checkmate an entire community's spirit. Carol, humiliated by the outpouring of support for my driveway chessboard, decided that if she could not win with citations and complaints, she would bury me under legal paperwork so deep I would not have time to play a single game. One morning, a courier knocked on my door and handed me an official envelope thicker than a phone book, stuffed with legal complaints filed by Carol on behalf of the HOA, accusing me of operating an unlicensed recreational facility, creating a nuisance property, violating aesthetic standards, encouraging loitering and, for reasons no one could explain, facilitating gambling because someone had once jokingly bet a slice of pizza on the outcome of a match. Carol demanded that the court order the immediate removal of the chessboard, the giant pieces, the chalkboard for community voting, and any other chess-related infrastructure from my property, claiming they were fundamentally incompatible with the quiet suburban character of Maplewood. My lawyer, who by this point had started referring to Carol as Queen Karen in all our emails, could barely contain his laughter reading through the complaints, but we both knew that Carol's goal was not to win, it was to exhaust me, to drown me in procedural nonsense until I gave up. What Carol failed to understand was that by now the chessboard was no longer just my project, it belonged to the whole neighborhood, and the moment word got out about the lawsuit, my driveway filled with neighbors offering help. My neighbor across the street, who happened to be a retired court clerk, volunteered to organize all my paperwork, while the teenager next door, who had started calling himself the chess commissioner, set up a GoFundMe called Save the Board, which hit its goal in under 2 hours. The legal battle became front-page news in our local paper, which ran the headline "Checkmate HOA" above a photo of Carol scowling in front of the chessboard while a kid in a pawn costume waved behind her. With the whole town watching, Carol's obsession turned from neighborhood gossip into regional entertainment, and soon reporters from nearby cities started calling, asking if they could cover the trial of the driveway chessboard. Meanwhile, the chessboard itself kept evolving, with neighbors adding their own touches. A small garden of potted plants shaped like chess pieces, a homemade scoreboard tracking neighborhood wins and losses, and even a folding chair throne labeled King of the Driveway for whoever won the most games that week. By the time we made it to the first court hearing, Carol's legal team was outnumbered by my lawyer, my volunteer neighbors, and the entire Maplewood Chess Club, who had all taken the day off work to show up in matching t-shirts that read "In this house, we castle." Carol argued that the chessboard violated Maplewood's aesthetic standards, citing rules about uniformity of driveways and prohibition of non-standard decorations, but my lawyer countered with a slideshow of other modified driveways in the neighborhood, including one homeowner who had painted a mural of his dog, and another who had turned their concrete into a giant hopscotch board for their kids. The judge, clearly unimpressed with Carol's parade of petty complaints, asked if any residents had formally complained about the chessboard, and not a single hand went up. In fact, half the room stood up to praise it. One elderly neighbor testified that the chess games gave him a reason to go outside again, while a stay-at-home mom said her kids had learned chess from the driveway matches and now played together instead of staring at their phones. Carol's lawyer tried to argue that the chessboard had damaged property values, but my neighbor, who was a real estate agent, produced actual listing data showing that nearby homes had received more interest since the board became a local attraction. Out of desperation, Carol tried to frame the chess gatherings as a potential safety hazard, arguing that large groups in the driveway could block emergency vehicles. But my lawyer pointed out that Carol herself had once held an outdoor wine tasting party in her own driveway that had spilled halfway into the street. The judge, visibly exhausted by the nonsense, asked if there was any actual evidence that the chessboard had harmed anyone or anything, and when Carol could not produce a single shred, the case was dismissed. The courtroom erupted in applause, which the judge did not bother to silence, and Carol stormed out muttering about appealing to the county board, a threat no one took seriously. The victory rally that night was unlike anything Maplewood had ever seen, with the chessboard lit up by string lights, neighbors bringing food, and my cousin's band, who by now had a standing invitation to every celebration I hosted, performing a song they wrote called Checkmate Carol. As the band played, neighbors challenged each other to rapid-fire blitz games, kids raced oversized pieces across the squares, and a few creative souls even staged a human chess match, dressing up in costumes to act out a full game. The chessboard had transcended being just a game, it was now a symbol of everything the neighborhood loved about itself, a living testament to creativity, community spirit, and the refusal to let laminated rules crush fun. Carol's defeat in court was important, but what mattered more was the way the chessboard had brought people together, turning strangers into teammates, casual players into lifelong fans, and an ordinary driveway into a gathering place that no amount of citations could ever dismantle. The chessboard had become Maplewood's heart, and no queen, no matter how furious, could checkmate an entire neighborhood united behind a game they loved. Carol's defeat in court was supposed to be the final chapter, but instead it acted like a chemical spill in her brain, sending her spiraling into an entirely new level of obsession that no bylaw manual could contain. Within days of losing her case, she sent out a neighborhood-wide email titled An Urgent Message About Driveway Lawlessness, warning residents that the chessboard ruling had created a dangerous legal precedent that could turn Maplewood into what she described as a chaotic free-for-all of unsanctioned driveway hobbies. The email went viral instantly, screenshotted and passed around with captions like "Carol has lost it" and "Fear and Loathing in Maplewood," but instead of scaring people, it only encouraged them. Almost overnight, my chessboard became part of a larger wave of creative rebellion. One house painted their driveway like a twister mat, another set up a cornhole court, and my personal favorite, the Wilsons down the street installed a mini putting green right next to their garage. The street transformed into an outdoor game arcade, a colorful and chaotic celebration of everything Carol had spent years trying to suppress, and the more people embraced the fun, the more visibly unhinged Carol became. She patrolled the street daily with a clipboard, snapping photos of every new creation, muttering to herself about violations, and occasionally stopping traffic to scold confused delivery drivers about the dangers of encouraging recreational concrete misuse. One afternoon, she even set up a folding table at the end of her driveway with a sign reading "Save Maplewood from Itself," complete with handouts outlining the so-called legal risks of unauthorized driveway games, though most people only stopped to grab a handout as a souvenir. Meanwhile, the chessboard itself evolved into a full-blown cultural landmark. People from nearby neighborhoods started driving by just to take photos with it, some bringing their own chess pieces to temporarily swap into ongoing games, like an unofficial community art project. Local artists painted a mural along my fence featuring giant chess pieces clashing in epic battle, with Carol herself depicted as a furious queen toppling over from checkmate, a piece of art that ended up on the local news when the mural won a small-town community art award. Carol's unraveling escalated further when she attempted to petition the county to declare chess a regulated outdoor activity requiring special permits, a move so absurd that the county clerk assumed it was a prank and forwarded the email to a local journalist, who gleefully published the entire thing under the headline "Suburban Chess Wars Enter Round 3. At that point, Carol could not walk outside without someone honking and shouting checkmate at her, and her own husband reportedly told a neighbor that he had started sleeping in the guest room just to avoid her late-night rants about chessboards and moral decay. Carol retaliated the only way she knew how: more citations, including one for unauthorized decorative lighting because of the string lights hung over the board, another for creating a tripping hazard with the oversized chess pieces, and one truly inspired violation for altering the primary purpose of a driveway, a phrase so vague my lawyer said it sounded like a rejected line from a bad dystopian novel. When none of the fines were paid, because legally none of them were enforceable, Carol escalated to direct action, sneaking into my yard just after midnight to flip all the chess pieces over, as though knocking them down would erase the entire game from history. She was caught red-handed on no fewer than 4 different security cameras, and footage of her toppling my giant queen in her bathrobe became an instant sensation on neighborhood social media, especially after someone set it to dramatic orchestral music and uploaded it under the title "Carol's Last Stand." By the following weekend, the chessboard was so popular that it became a full-fledged tourist attraction, with local businesses offering chess-themed discounts, restaurants naming sandwiches after famous chess moves, and a nearby brewery releasing a limited-edition lager called Checkmate Carol with a label featuring her infamous bathrobe incident. With the chessboard now untouchable both legally and culturally, Carol grew more desperate, filing noise complaints about imaginary chess-related shouting, claiming the board caused dangerous reflections that blinded drivers, and even attempting to argue that the black squares absorbed too much heat and violated thermal safety standards. Each new complaint made the chessboard more famous, and by the time a documentary crew from a streaming service showed up to film a feature called Concrete Kings, the chessboard rebellion, Carol had become a living urban legend, whispered about by kids like the boogeyman of bad bylaws. The chessboard itself became more than a game, it was a symbol of creative resistance, a reminder that community meant more than grass height and mailbox colors, and that fun, even the simplest kind, could unify an entire street in ways no HOA meeting ever could. Carol's failure became her legacy, her name forever tied not to the rules she spent years obsessively enforcing, but to the one driveway she could never defeat. By the time winter rolled around, even Carol seemed to understand that the game was over. She stopped patrolling, stopped sending emails, and started avoiding eye contact whenever she passed the chessboard, as though seeing it physically caused her pain. The neighborhood, however, kept playing with holiday-themed chess pieces for Christmas, spooky ones for Halloween, and even a Valentine's Day match where the queens were dressed like Cupid. What had started as a simple project to brighten up my dull driveway had evolved into the soul of the street, a celebration of creativity, community, and the simple joy of taking something ordinary and making it extraordinary. Carol had tried to crush the chessboard, but instead she made it legendary, a permanent monument to the day Maplewood remembered who it really belonged to, the people who lived there, not the ones who tried to control them. After months of humiliation, legal failure, viral infamy, and the slow erosion of her once absolute power, Carol did what all defeated HOA tyrants eventually do: she resigned. Her resignation email, which arrived with no subject line and only 3 sentences, blamed the chessboard for undermining the serious work of the HOA, accused the neighborhood of embracing lawlessness disguised as community spirit, and ended with a vague threat that one day Maplewood would regret its descent into chaos. Most people deleted the email after reading it, but one neighbor printed it, framed it, and hung it in his garage next to a photo of Carol's infamous nighttime chess piece Rampage, ensuring that her final words would live on as part of the permanent folklore of the block. Carol's house went up for sale almost immediately, but its listing included a disclaimer that it was located directly across from a nationally recognized cultural landmark, a fact that both lowered her asking price and significantly increased foot traffic from curious buyers who wanted to see the chessboard in person. By the time her moving truck pulled out of the driveway, neighbors were lined up along the sidewalk, some waving goodbye, others simply watching silently as the woman who tried to rule them disappeared down the street for good. The chessboard, of course, remained untouched, unchallenged, and more beloved than ever, especially after the new homeowners across the street turned their own driveway into a matching checkerboard, creating what local news quickly dubbed the Maplewood Boardwalk. With Carol gone, the HOA shifted its entire tone, moving away from pointless fines and obsessive micromanagement toward actual community-building efforts, most of which involved embracing the very creativity Carol had tried so hard to stamp out. The first event the newly reformed HOA hosted was a chess tournament in my driveway, complete with a barbecue, live music, and a trophy made from one of the original toppled chess pieces Carol had tried to destroy. From that moment on, the chessboard was no longer just a neighborhood quirk, it was Maplewood's beating heart, a physical representation of the street's defiant joy, and a reminder that creativity and community spirit could outlast even the most relentless bureaucracy. New families moving in were told the story almost immediately, not by realtors or welcome committees, but by excited kids who dragged them to my driveway to explain how the whole street had once gone to war over a game board. The chessboard became the backdrop for birthday parties, block parties, holiday festivals, and even a wedding proposal where a neighbor's boyfriend spelled out "marry me" in chess pieces while the whole street watched from their porches. People traveled from neighboring towns just to play a game on the famous board, leaving behind notes, photos, and even their own handmade chess pieces, each one adding to the living history of the driveway that refused to be boring. A local artist painted a mural on the side of my garage titled "Checkmate Carol," a whimsical scene of a furious queen piece being driven off the board by smiling pawns, and it became so popular that it was eventually printed on t-shirts, tote bags, and coffee mugs sold at the annual Maplewood Block Party. Years later, when the County Historical Society officially recognized the chessboard as a cultural landmark, the plaque they installed described it not just as a driveway game, but as the moment Maplewood reclaimed its sense of humor, creativity, and community pride from the grip of unnecessary authority. Carol herself became more myth than memory, her name invoked whenever someone worried the new HOA might try to overreach again, a sort of cautionary ghost story parents told their kids about what happens when you care more about power than people. Even after I eventually sold my house and moved across town, the chessboard stayed, maintained by new owners who understood its importance and promised to keep the games going for as long as people wanted to play. I would visit sometimes just to watch a match or read the notes left behind by visiting players, and every time I stood on that concrete, I remembered how it all started. Just a man with a paintbrush, tired of a boring driveway, and a neighborhood that decided fun was worth fighting for. The chessboard had outlived Carol, outlasted the lawsuit, and become something no HOA rulebook could ever erase. A reminder that the heart of a neighborhood does not come from perfectly mowed lawns or matching mailboxes, but from the people who live there and the joy they create together. It stood as proof that no matter how rigid the rules, Creativity will always find a way to sneak through the cracks, set up a chessboard and invite the whole street to play. And long after the paint starts to fade and the pieces were down from decades of games, the story will still be told. The story of the driveway that dared to be different, the queen who lost her crown, and the neighbors who decided that checkmate was just the beginning.